Gold. No matter what way you slice it, fantasy role-playing games use gold as its default currency. And while it's as common in Tolkien as it is in things like Game of Thrones or Morkborg, there's only actually one problem. And that is that gold is kind of a lame fantasy currency. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Desks and Dorks. I am Kyle, I am the Dork. This is a redux, or redo, of a previous video. So, a while ago, we did a video all on the problems of gold. Unfortunately, a copyright claim happened with the music that we used in the background of that video, despite the fact that the music came from a copyright-free site. So, unfortunately, the audio for the entire video got scrapped. Now, I had enough fans actually reach out and say, hey, we really want to revisit this video, so I am redoing it now. The original video has been privated. If you're like, wow, I've seen this video before, you're right, you have, or at least a version of it. However, I get to redo this one with an expanded script and some expanded points, which are really good, and I get to fix a lot of the comments and issues that were in the original video, or at least problems that I had with the original video. I feel like our content has gotten a lot better, and I actually get to revisit a video that I loved doing with a brand new lens, and that makes me really, really, really happy. So, a couple things. If you like what we do, like, share, comment, subscribe. If you really want to support us, links in the description below for all the awesome stuff that you can get, all of our games. Let's talk about the problem with gold, because what's the deal with airline gold? Now, if you've been playing RPGs at all, at any length of time, you probably have used gold in your campaigns. Gold pieces, gold bars, gold bullion, gold-plated pistols, and one of you picks Odd Job and then winds up murdering you with a stupid hat. Alright, enough with the 007 references. But yes, I am of the opinion that gold is actually a really terrible currency. It's terrible for a number of different reasons, both in terms of gameplay and in terms of building a world that is believable for your players, and I want to talk a little bit about some of it. Now, this video is actually going to be split into two parts. One of them is going to be the issues that I have with it from a gameplay perspective, and the issues that I have with it from a believability perspective as well. I'm going to address a lot of the points in this video that I didn't get to do in the original video, which makes me really happy. So, without further ado, let's talk about my gameplay problems with it. So, there are a couple different things that I despise about gold. One is that it feels generic. It's really simple. In a world of fantasy that, you know, you could have literally anything. Magic potions, I don't know, a walrus that shoots lasers out of its eyes, several goblins in a trench coat that serve you because that was the part of the deal. It just feels like in a fantasy world where there's almost any possibility or any probability, gold is the generic default. It's also the case of analysis paralysis, I think. If you have played D&D, especially for any length of time, you know that sometimes you run into whole sessions where all the party does is go shopping. This means that despite those things, it's really hard for the players to actually decide what they want to do. I have legit GM'd like 2 to 3 hour sessions where the players were poring over every book trying to figure out what types of items they want. Now, again, they could have done that at home, but they didn't because you've GM'd for any length of time. You know, if there's one thing players usually don't like to do, it's homework. And so it often leads to this, again, case of analysis paralysis. And it's hard to find ways to spend it on meaningful things. So for example, I'll use my knowledge of 3.5. In the original 3.5 manual, a +1 modification on your sword was anywhere from like 1,200 to 3,000 gold, depending on who you were getting to enchant it and where you got the stuff from. That is a substantial amount of gold for a not so meaningful upgrade to a weapon. It can feel like, as a player, you have done a lot of work to get a not so meaningful upgrade. Now we get to talk about some of my believability and relatability things that I don't like to use gold for. So in most cultures, if we are looking at the cultures that the fantasy role-playing game genre is based on, do not like to use gold because it has religious and cultural significance. This is actually particularly true. I included a picture of a sarcophagus, an Egyptian sarcophagus, very deliberately here, because again, one of the things about gold, especially for the Egyptians, it was sacred. It wasn't used for everything. It was used for some amount of currency, but those that had gold currency were usually very well off. And if you were using a vast quantity of gold, usually it was for something like funerary rites or for the passing of power. Think of something like in a coronation ceremony of those lines. This means that because gold is a rare and precious metal, to most cultures, it carries a rare and precious cultural or religious connotation, which I think is far more interesting than using it as actual basic currency. Now, the other issue is the ease of control of gold. Now, if you look at the way that most modern civilizations or historical civilizations use minted currency, it all comes back to ease of control. Now, gold, because it was able to be controlled for such a long period of time, made it a good default currency here in our real world. And what I mean by that is gold mines are not exactly very common. So if you were a government or a power, all you had to do was seize one of the existing gold mines and maintain control of that. That actually was a good way to sort of eliminate inflation, because again, it's not like other people could mint additional gold coins if you controlled the majority of the gold deposits or had alliances or trade agreements with people who did control gold deposits. So the ease of control actually makes sense for why we would use gold. However, gold is still a rare precious metal. And again, part of that ease of control goes back to gold's scarcity. Now again, this is a fantasy role-playing setting. You can make a fantasy world where gold is everywhere, but I do think that because if gold is a precious metal, I don't think if I'm making a fantasy setting, I want to make it as prevalent as humanly possible. And last but certainly not least, this is the biggest actual thing that I want to talk about here as a problem for why I dislike gold, because it's something that never gets brought up in role-playing games. Gold weighs a ton. Like, gold is an actual metal. It is heavy, and a bunch of gold coins, loose gold coins, rattling around in your backpack is going to turn you into, like, I don't know if you've ever watched a Mack truck almost slide off the road because its trailer is too heavy. That's basically what's going to happen. Legitimately. Imagine for a second that your character is mid-sword fight with a vampire, and there's about 80 pounds of gold coins actually weighing down the backpack. It's an insane thing to think about, having somebody actually carry all of that currency around, especially when the currency is literal metal moving around all of the time. Now, part of the reason that we have credit cards at all was during the late Middle Ages. The Abbasid Caliphate and the Templars actually brought it back from the Crusades, but we actually created two modern credit card systems because, again, people figured out very quickly that it's not practical to carry around that much actual metal. And they weren't just using gold coins either. They were using silver, copper, and cheaper metals. You actually have an incredible example of this here in the United States, where we had someone in the early colonial government that's reported in the colonial records drowned to death because their pockets were weighted down with too many silver coins. They literally could not get themselves out of a river, and because of that, were literally drowned due to the amount of currency they were carrying. Weight and practicality is a huge, huge issue with gold coins, and every time I see character sheets that have like 2,000, 3,000 gold coins on their person, I think it's entirely impractical. And again, fantasy setting, we can suspend our disbelief. But it does go one step further to illustrating why I think gold is not a great currency when we're talking about role-playing games. And last but certainly not least, I get to talk a little bit about economics. So this is a picture, by the way, and I use this picture very deliberately. This is a picture of Mansa Musa from the Atlas of Catalan. Mansa Musa was historically the richest person alive. Mansa Musa would routinely make a pilgrimage from Mali, the kingdom which he ruled, to Mecca because he was a devout Muslim. Now, one of the things that he would actually do, because Mansa Musa, despite being an incredibly powerful king, was apparently very generous, and he liked to sort of like yeet gold at people. And by yeet gold, I mean give enough gold to turn, I kid you not, paupers into kings overnight. The problem with that is that the amount of gold that Mansa Musa would bring into cities actually destabilized the economies of those places. And in fact, there are accounts of ancient cities telling Mansa Musa to either not bring gold or not bother to come back because it would take years for people to get their economies back on track after Mansa Musa would show up and be like, "We ballin'," and it's great. Now, again, fantasy settings, we can play around with it as much as you'd like. Again, there's a suspension of disbelief. But again, as somebody who is attracted to the realistic side of fantasy, or at least to the historically based side of fantasy, it's really hard for me to like or enjoy gold coins as a currency because There is such a huge precedent for that level of gold coins to destabilize an economy. Imagine, for example, you are living in a 13th century hut. You are a peasant in a lowly village, and a party of like 4 warlocks, God love the infernal sugar daddies, decide that they want to show up with 3,000 gold apiece. Again, you have probably never seen a gold piece in your life, and overnight, these people are essentially buying small drinks at your tavern with more than a year's worth of your wage. What does that do to the local economy? We actually have to think about that and consider it. It's one of the things that I think is very interesting and I think is very compelling. It's also one of the most compelling reasons why gold is not a great fantasy currency. So now we need to talk about the different things that you can do other than use gold in your campaigns. Now, traditionally, of course, gold is a form of currency, but most of the time it's also a form of quest reward. Now, you know that I don't talk about Dungeons & Dragons a lot on the channel, or at the very least, I don't make it the main focus of our videos. That's because I don't always love that it's just become the default role-playing game, but I'm going to use all of my alternate solutions through the lens of Dungeons & Dragons, because in my opinion, it's the game that actually is most guilty of using gold as its default currency. So, one of the things that you can use as a currency to reward players with are special abilities. Consider a cleric, for example, whether a good or a bad cleric. One of the things that they could learn, should they decide to do a job for an archbishop or a diocese or a parish or just a particularly, powerful individual of the clergy, is they could learn how to do a holy or an unholy wreath. This will allow them to expend a spell slot, wrap the spell around their body like a holy aura or an unholy aura, and then use it as a free action later on, only against somebody that they are adjacent to. For example, when they are able to cast multiple spells in a given turn, wade into melee combat and get a heal off on themselves or somebody adjacent to them as a free action, the possibilities are mostly endless, and that's what I particularly enjoy about this strategy. Another thing that you could do is you can reward them with weapons as characters, or you can use this as a way of making powerful allies or powerful enemies, depending on how you spend it. Now, I am actually referencing a particular book. It is the Legacy Weapons book from 3.5, the best manual, I think, or at least one of the best manuals in Dungeons & Dragons history, which basically laid out rules for weapons that leveled up like characters do. These weapons are both A, tied to their wielder, B, essentially sacred, and C, worth way, way more than their weight in gold. This means that these types of weapons could be rewarded not just as some form of currency for the regular folk, but as currency for powerful individuals like kings, demigods, or archmages. Now, again, I'm going to give you an example of how we could do this. So, for example, what if you gave a player a sword that, of course, manages to, detect if someone is lying, grants them an immediate reaction when they're faced with danger, or force their enemies to flee. Having a weapon that can use those abilities on its turn, the same way a player would be able to use their abilities, is a very potentially powerful boon. And again, it makes both quest rewards way more interesting. I would much rather get a weapon like this, but also it makes the idea of currency much better. Imagine being so powerful that you no longer trade in something as mundane as actual money or cash, and you wind up trading in things like these weapons. But my favorite type of currency is simply favors. Now, one of my favorite sci-fi properties was actually a Flash game that talked all about using favors as a form of currency, and it wasn't my favorite game because I liked the gameplay, I didn't, but I loved the world building and the story. So, favors, I think, are another great form of currency, and there's some basis for this in real historical fact. It wouldn't have been uncommon, for example, to have people in your village or your town give out their skills and time as a form of currency, which, to be frank, is kind of what we still do here in the modern era anyway. Most of us have an hourly wage, or at the very least, if we don't have an hourly wage, we have a salaried one that is in conjunction with our skills, and favors work a little bit like that. So, for example, a favor from people who are adept at traveling the wastes or the wilds might be revealing a hidden location full of treasure, or giving the party the ability to locate someone that they are attempting to find or seek after this person has disappeared. A powerful warrior, for example, might be able to assist in actual combat, or maybe give them some additional training. I like this particular rule. I usually like to print off a higher level character sheet, give it to the person who I think is going to have the most fun with it, and then watch them giggle and cackle gleefully as your plus 15 Sword of Sundering does exactly what its namesake says it would usually do. And last but certainly not least, imagine training in a useful ability. For example, a thief that could maybe help make your proficiency in lockpicking much better, maybe granting you temporary advantage once per day, or a flat bonus on lockpick checks, or perhaps a priest that gives you 1 additional use of your healing spell per day, something along those lines. Having someone who is powerful, capable, and talented offer to train you rather than do something as mundane as gold is again a far more interesting concept. It also makes the players much more invested in the relationships that they build, and it has some basis in actual fact, which is why I enjoy it quite as much as I do. And with that, folks, that brings us to the end of our video today. Thank you to the fans that requested that I remake this one. I really wanted to do this, actually. If there are other older ideas you'd like to see me remake, please let me know. Again, if you feel like we have deserved it, a like, a share, a comment, a subscribe goes quite a long way to helping this channel continue to grow. And if you want to help us keep the lights on, you can get our games over at itch.io or at World of Game Design, Indie Press Revolution, or Exalted Funeral. Put the links to those in the description below. Last but certainly not least, we have a Discord, and I would really appreciate if you come join us there, talk to us about games and other fun stuff. I'm Kyle Ott for Discs and Dorks. You've been absolutely amazing, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.